I met Vanessa during a summer internship in Chicago. I was 23, fresh out of college, doing grunt work for a company that barely remembered my name. She worked in a small design studio 2 floors up. I saw her almost every day in the building lobby, always holding a coffee, always on her phone, always with that little half-smile like she was quietly laughing at the world. One morning, the elevator stalled for a good 30 seconds, just long enough for us to strike up a conversation. It was quick, nothing deep, but by the end of the week, I'd worked up the courage to ask her out for lunch. She said yes without hesitation, and something about that confidence stuck with me. We had tacos at a food truck and talked for hours. That's how it started. Our relationship moved fast, but never felt rushed. We just fit. We had our differences. She was spontaneous. I was more methodical, but somehow it balanced. I loved how alive she made everything feel. How she always had a plan, an idea, a wild theory about something. And she said she loved how calm I was, how I made her feel safe without making her feel small. We moved in together after about a year and a half. Got a small place just outside the city with squeaky floors and a noisy neighbor upstairs, but we didn't care. It was ours. Those early years were some of my favorites. We cooked dinner together, stayed up late watching documentaries we never finished, adopted a cat we found under our car one rainy night. We argued sometimes, but never about anything that mattered. It was real, grounded. We got married in the spring, nothing extravagant, just a backyard ceremony with string lights, a rented tent, and about 30 people who mattered most. I remember the way she looked walking toward me down that short grass aisle, barefoot, hair down, that quiet smile she gave me right before we said our vows. It wasn't about the dress or the setup. It was about her. Us. After the wedding, we settled into what I think most people would call a normal life. I got a full-time position with a mid-sized logistics firm. She picked up freelance design projects and even started a little side business doing branding work for local shops. We weren't swimming in money, but we were never struggling. We budgeted, we saved, we dreamed. A bigger place, maybe kids someday, maybe travel. And through it all, we had each other. The ordinary routines, the quiet rituals, the shared glances across crowded rooms. We built something I thought was strong. At that point in our story, there were no cracks. Just life. Steady and good. The life Vanessa and I built wasn't flashy, but it was ours. We settled into a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. The kind of place with kids riding bikes down the street, neighbors who waved from driveways, and a grocery store where the cashier knew your name. It wasn't the city, but we liked that. Slower, simpler. We'd been in that house for over 8 years by now. It still creaked when you walked upstairs, and the back door stuck when it rained, but it was home. The living room was filled with photos, vacations, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings where we'd caught each other laughing in some candid frame. Vanessa had a knack for turning spaces into comfort. Soft blankets, scented candles, shelves lined with books she'd half read but wouldn't part with. The kitchen was her domain, but I held my ground on the grill outside. By this point, we had our routines carved out like familiar paths in a forest. Mornings were a soft shuffle, me up early, making coffee. She'd come down a bit later wrapped in a blanket, rubbing her eyes, always acting surprised it was morning again. We'd sit together for a few minutes before the day pulled us in different directions. I worked full-time in logistics, now managing a small team. Steady job, decent pay, reliable hours. Vanessa worked from home mostly, still designing logos and websites, sometimes working late into the night when a deadline crept up. She said she liked the freedom of it, the creative control. I admired that about her, how she carved her own lane and stuck with it. Evenings were our reconnection time. If she wasn't working late, we'd cook together. Sometimes just frozen pizza and a salad. Other times she'd go all out and make something that filled the house with the kind of smells that made me pause in the hallway. We'd eat at the kitchen island more often than the dining table, laughing about whatever we'd seen online or complaining about the news. Weekends were slower. We'd do yard work, catch up on errands, binge a show if we both had the energy. She liked dragging me to farmers markets and second-hand stores, always hunting for a piece she couldn't describe until she saw it. I usually just followed her around with a coffee in hand and nodded when she got excited. And through it all, I genuinely felt content. I knew we weren't perfect. Nobody is, but we had something real. Years of inside jokes, late-night talks, shared routines that became second nature. We knew each other's moods, finished each other's sentences sometimes, and even after more than a decade, I still caught myself watching her from across the room and thinking, yeah, that's my wife. I didn't know it then, But those were the days I'd later look back on with a kind of painful nostalgia. The calm before I understood how much I didn't see. But right then, I thought we had everything we needed. If I had to point to one moment that really changed everything between us, not in a bad way, just in terms of depth, it was when Vanessa got pregnant with our first child. We hadn't been trying aggressively. It was more of a let's see what happens kind of phase. And then one morning, she came into the kitchen barefoot, holding a pregnancy test, eyes wide and already teary. I dropped my coffee mug. Not in shock, just literally dropped it because I was so stunned I forgot I was holding something. We were both nervous, of course, but there was a joy in that nervousness. We went to all the appointments together. She let me hold the printed ultrasound photos like they were made of gold. We painted the nursery ourselves, pale yellow, with little wall decals of clouds and animals. Vanessa spent hours researching the best bottles, the safest car seats, the softest crib sheets. She threw herself into it the way she threw herself into everything, fully, obsessively, passionately. The day our daughter was born, I cried. Real, ugly, unfiltered tears. She was perfect, tiny, red-faced, loud as anything. Vanessa looked at me from the hospital bed, sweaty and exhausted, and just whispered, "We did it." That moment felt like a promise. A new chapter we were walking into together. Parenthood was messy, obviously. The sleep deprivation nearly broke us those first few months. But we made it work. We took turns waking up in the night, learned to function with 4 hours of sleep, laughed through the diaper explosions and grocery store meltdowns. Vanessa went back to work slowly, spacing out her clients, and I took on a little more around the house. We never had a big discussion about roles. We just shifted where we needed to, filled the gaps for each other. That's what we did. Our daughter grew fast. And as she did, so did our little world. Playdates, pediatrician visits, bedtime stories. The routines deepened. We stopped going out as much, and when we did, it was usually to Target or the park. But I didn't miss our old life. This felt fuller, realer. Like this was what all those years of dating and building and working had led us to. We even started talking about another baby, cautiously, half joking at first, then more seriously. Vanessa said she missed the baby stage already. I missed seeing her that happy. She had this glow to her when she was in mom mode, confident, funny, fiercely protective. I loved watching her parent. We were stable. That's the word that always comes to mind when I look back on those days. Not in a boring way, but in a way that made me feel like the ground beneath my feet wasn't going anywhere. We had our routines, our shared goals, our private language that only people who've built a life together speak. And in that space of family, of home, I trusted everything. Every word, every smile, every quiet morning. I didn't know then what was really behind it all, but I believed in us. Fully. It was around our daughter's 3rd birthday when Vanessa brought up the idea again. A second baby. We were sitting on the porch one warm evening, watching our daughter chase Bubbles across the lawn, when Vanessa leaned over and said, "I think she needs a sibling." I looked at her, unsure if she was serious, but the way she said it, softly, with a quiet certainty, made me realize she'd been thinking about it for a while. We didn't rush into it, but we didn't hesitate either. We already had the stroller, the crib, the muscle memory of sleepless nights. In some ways, preparing for a second child felt less stressful. We knew what we were doing this time, or at least we thought we did. She got pregnant that fall. The second pregnancy wasn't as easy for her. She was more tired, more distant some days, but I chalked it up to chasing a toddler while growing another human. Still, something was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. She stopped including me in the small things she used to. With our first, she would send me updates from every appointment, little texts about the heartbeat, the measurements, even what she'd eaten for lunch. This time, I had to ask. But I figured that's just how things are with second pregnancies. You're more tired, more used to it. It's less of a mystery. The baby came in the middle of a snowstorm. A boy. Dark hair, lungs like an opera singer, and long fingers that curled tightly around my pinky. Vanessa held him against her chest and smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I remembered from before. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was me reading too much into things. I didn't dwell on it. We brought him home wrapped in the same blanket his sister had used. Our daughter was thrilled to be a big sister, though the novelty wore off fast when she realized the baby wasn't much of a playmate yet. Still, we adjusted. Bottles, diaper changes, late-night feedings all over again. The cycle returned, and with it, the foggy bliss of early parenthood. Vanessa bounced back quickly, at least physically. She started working again sooner than she had after our daughter. She seemed eager to reclaim some piece of herself outside the house. I encouraged it. She'd been carrying so much weight, literally and figuratively. I wanted her to feel like herself again. But I couldn't help noticing how easily she slipped into distraction. More time on her phone. More solo outings that didn't have clear explanations. Again, nothing outrageous. Just small shifts. Moments where I'd reach for her, and she wasn't really there. Still, I didn't question it. We had 2 kids. A house. A decade behind us. And I was tired, too tired in that deep, quiet way all parents of young children are. The kind of tired that makes you overlook things that don't immediately feel like problems. Looking back, I can see the lines were already forming. But then, I thought we were just a family trying our best. There wasn't a single moment where I suddenly thought, something is wrong. If anything, it was the absence of something that got to me. A space between us that hadn't been there before, growing slowly enough that I didn't realize how far apart we drifted until I tried to reach for her and felt nothing. Life with 2 kids is noisy, unpredictable, and often exhausting. I told myself that's what it was. We were in the weeds, constant schedules, sleepless nights, diaper blowouts, snack negotiations. We didn't have much left in the tank for each other. I didn't take it personally. But over time, I started to notice things I couldn't ignore. Vanessa's phone, once carelessly left on the kitchen counter or buried under couch cushions, was now glued to her. Always face down. Always locked. And when a notification came through, she'd glance at it, smile slightly, and then slide it into her pocket without a word. I remember once, just before dinner, she laughed at something on her phone. It wasn't a big laugh, just a short exhale, like something had amused her. I asked, "What's funny?" She looked up, blinked like she'd forgotten I was in the room, and said, "Oh, nothing. Just a meme." Then she turned the screen off and walked away. Harmless? Maybe. But it lingered. She started going out more, too. Not in a suspicious way, at least not on the surface. Just things like meeting a client or running errands. But the errands started lasting longer. The meetings ran late. Sometimes she'd come home with makeup slightly smudged, hair fluffed like she'd restyled it in a rush. I never asked. I trusted her. Or maybe I didn't want to hear an answer that would change everything. Even her story started to feel curated. Like she was giving me a version of her day, polished and vague. It went well, just the usual. You know how it is. But I didn't know. I used to know every corner of her life, and now I was getting the headlines. The intimacy changed, too. We were still affectionate, still said, "I love you," still curled up on the couch during movie nights. But the connection felt filtered, like she was holding part of herself back. Not because she didn't love me, I still believed she did, but because her energy was somewhere else. I just didn't know where. One night, after we'd finally gotten both kids to bed, I looked over at her while she scrolled through her phone. The light from the screen made her face glow, but her expression was unreadable, somewhere between focus and fondness. She smiled softly, like she was responding to someone's voice in her head. I asked, "What are you thinking about?" She blinked, looked at me, and said, "Nothing, just tired." And maybe she was. Or maybe I was just starting to wake up. By the time our son turned 1, I'd gotten used to a version of Vanessa that felt slightly out of reach. She was still here, present in the literal sense, but emotionally, she moved like someone carrying a secret weight. It wasn't that she was cold, exactly. It was more like warmth had become an effort for her, like everything soft between us had to pass through a filter before reaching me. And I didn't know what to make of that. I blamed work stress, parenting fatigue, even seasonal depression. I blamed anything but her. Because the idea of questioning your partner when you've built an entire life together feels like opening a door you don't know how to close again. Some nights she would fall asleep instantly, phone buried under her pillow like it needed protection. Other nights, she stayed up late, pacing lightly between the living room and the kitchen, claiming she couldn't sleep. I'd hear the soft shuffle of her feet, the low buzz of her phone, the sound of a muted laugh. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering who made her laugh like that. Sometimes she'd come back to bed hours later and curl up next to me like everything was normal. Sometimes she wouldn't come back until I was already asleep. I didn't confront her. Not because I didn't notice, but because I didn't want to start keeping score. That's what I told myself. Marriage wasn't a courtroom. We were just tired people trying to keep everything running. And when she looked at me with that practiced smile and asked if I was okay, I nodded and said yes, because part of me still believed if I kept things steady on my side, everything else would settle too. But I couldn't unsee what I was seeing. I noticed how she dressed differently when she said she had meetings, subtle at first. A touch more makeup. Clothes she didn't usually wear unless we had a date night. Perfume in the middle of the day. She'd brush it off. I just felt like dressing up. Or, I had to look presentable. And I believed her, or tried to. I wanted to. Then there were the photos. Family pictures we'd taken over the years lined the hallway. Our daughter in a pumpkin patch, Vanessa holding our newborn son, the four of us grinning on the beach. But I started looking at them differently. Not in a paranoid way, just searching. Like I was trying to find something in our expressions I'd missed in real time. A flicker of dishonesty. A warning. I didn't find anything obvious. Just smiles. Maybe too perfect. Even the kids didn't notice anything. Our daughter loved her mom fiercely, and our son lit up every time she walked into the room. She was affectionate with them. She never missed a bedtime story or a school event. But with me, everything was increasingly transactional. Can you pick up groceries? Did you get the email from daycare? Can you hold him while I finish this design? Life became a series of logistics. We functioned like a team, but not like lovers. Not even really like friends. And yet, I said nothing. Not because I didn't feel the shift, but because I still couldn't believe something as sacred as our life could be quietly slipping away without one of us reaching out to stop it. I thought maybe this was just what happens after years together. Maybe closeness just ebbs. But deep down, something in me had begun to wonder, what if it wasn't just drifting? What if she was already gone? I don't know what finally pushed me over the edge. There wasn't some dramatic moment, no screaming argument or slipped confession. Just a night like any other, a quiet dinner, the kids bathed and tucked in, Vanessa sitting on the couch with her laptop, headphones in, distant. I was sitting across from her, watching her mouth move silently as she responded to something on the screen. When it hit me with full force, I didn't know who she was talking to. And I didn't know if the children sleeping upstairs were truly mine. The thought made me feel sick, physically ill. I got up and walked outside without saying anything. The night air was cool, and I sat on the front steps just breathing. I didn't want to feel this way. I didn't want to be the kind of man who looked at his own children and asked himself whose eyes they really had. But once that door opened in my mind, I couldn't close it. Not anymore. It had been building for years. Little things I'd tucked away and dismissed. Our son's birth weight being oddly low for the due date she'd given. A joke she'd once made at a party about the mailman's timing that got a weird laugh from one of her friends. Our daughter's early milestones not quite lining up with what I remembered reading. I'd never questioned any of it seriously. Because who does? I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake with the idea buzzing in my head like static. And by morning, I had made a decision I didn't fully understand but couldn't walk back from. I bought 2 DNA kits. There was a clinical numbness to it. The swabs, the labels, the sealed bags. I did it while Vanessa was out running errands, like so many of her solo afternoons. I waited until the kids were calm and distracted. I handled it carefully, gently, as if I were preparing for surgery. It felt wrong. It felt like betrayal. But something deeper whispered that the betrayal had already happened, and I was simply acknowledging its shape. I didn't tell anyone. Not a friend, not my brother. Not even the part of myself that used to believe love could survive anything. I mailed the kits in a blank envelope, chose the option for email-only results, and then I waited. And let me tell you, there's a very specific kind of dread that lives in the in-between. The days after you press send on something you can't undo, when everything looks normal on the surface but you're walking around in a fog, knowing that the world might tilt at any second. Vanessa didn't notice. Or if she did, she didn't ask. We moved through those days like actors reading from a script we'd rehearsed for too long. Mornings, routines, soft kisses on the cheek, grocery lists. But I wasn't really there anymore. My mind was a loop of images, my daughter's face, my son's laugh, Vanessa's smile from years ago that now looked like a mask I couldn't read. I told myself I was probably wrong, that I'd get the results and feel ashamed for ever doubting, that I'd rip them up without reading the fine print, hold my kids a little tighter, and move on. But deep down, I knew something was coming, and I wasn't ready. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. I was at work, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring blankly at a spreadsheet that wouldn't balance, when the email notification popped up. Just a subject line, your DNA test results are ready. My heart didn't race. It stopped, just for a second. Everything around me, the noise, the dull buzz of fluorescent lights, the sound of keyboards, faded into a kind of static hum. I sat there with my finger hovering over the trackpad, not moving, not breathing. I clicked. The page loaded slowly. Too slowly. Then there it was, plain and clinical. Probability of paternity, 0%. I stared at the number like it was written in a language I couldn't understand. 0. Not low. Not unlikely. 0. The next line was even worse, if that's possible. There is no biological relationship between the alleged father and the tested child. Not once, but twice. 2 separate entries. Both results matched. Both children. Neither of them were mine. I didn't feel anger at first, or grief. Just a strange, hollow kind of calm. Like my body understood something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I printed the results. I folded the paper twice, then once more, until it was small enough to fit in my wallet. And then I sat there in my chair for what must have been an hour, staring at nothing, trying to breathe like a person who still had a family. I left work early. Told them I wasn't feeling well, which was technically true. At home, everything looked exactly the same. Toys on the floor. Vanessa's coffee mug by the sink. A sweater she'd tossed over the armrest of the couch. Domestic normalcy, dressed in betrayal. I picked up my daughter from school, carried my son in from daycare. Fed them, bathed them, put them to bed. Their faces. I couldn't stop looking at them. Every laugh, every expression, every sound they made was suddenly laced with a kind of grief I wasn't prepared for. I loved them. That hadn't changed. But now I didn't know what that love meant. What it was rooted in. Vanessa came home late that night. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. She walked in with a distracted smile, gave me a peck on the cheek, and started unloading some shopping bags from the car. Talking about dinner ideas. The kids. Something funny she saw online. I watched her move through our kitchen like nothing had shifted. Like she wasn't a stranger who had lied to me every single day for more than a decade. And maybe the scariest part was how good she was at it. How effortless the lie had become. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed time. Not to understand. It was too late for that. But to figure out how to bury this house before it buried me. I waited until the weekend. I don't know why, exactly, maybe because I wanted the space to do this without worrying about work calls or daily distractions. Maybe because I wanted to give myself a couple of days to rehearse how I'd say it. But honestly, nothing could have prepared me for the moment it actually happened. No amount of calm could have stopped the wave that was building in my chest. That Saturday, I woke up early. Earlier than usual. The house was quiet. The kids were still asleep, Vanessa curled on her side, facing the wall. I sat downstairs with the DNA report in my hand, unfolded, heavy as stone. I stared at it until the words blurred. 0, 0, 0. I read it so many times I stopped seeing the letters, only the lie. Only the truth beneath it. I waited until the kids were distracted with breakfast and cartoons. Vanessa was in the bedroom, folding laundry, humming like it was just another Saturday. I stood in the doorway and said her name. She looked up, smiling. That smile. The same one I believed in for over a decade. The same one she'd used to hide everything. I didn't smile back. I pulled the DNA report from my pocket and held it up. I know, I said. Just that. Her smile vanished like a light switch. She froze, laundry still in her hands, face draining of color. I know they're not mine. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything, just stared at the paper. Then she opened her mouth, too quickly, like she'd been storing excuses, ready for a moment like this. Wait, it's not what you think, she started. Let me explain. But I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. No, I said quietly. No more lies. I walked downstairs, calmly, deliberately, and began collecting everything. Her clothes, her makeup, her books, her shoes. Every last piece of her. I opened the front window and started throwing it all out. Bag by bag, shirt by shirt, letting the neighborhood see the mess she'd made, letting her feel the cold exposure of truth in daylight. She followed me down, panicked, stammering things I didn't bother listening to. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than anything I could have screamed. When she tried to step between me and the door, I handed her the keys to her car. No, I said again. You don't live here anymore. She looked at me like she didn't understand the words. Like this was all happening to someone else. What about the kids? She whispered. I looked her dead in the eye. They're not mine. That shattered her. I saw it. And part of me wanted to feel something. Rage, satisfaction, heartbreak. But there was nothing left to give her. Just the hollow justice of truth finally speaking louder than love. I kept her car. It was in my name anyway. I canceled her access to our bank accounts, shut off her credit cards, changed the locks that afternoon. She stood on the curb, bags at her feet, calling my name while the kids looked out the window, confused. I told them Mommy had to go away for a while. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I just closed the door behind me and let the silence settle. She tried calling. Dozens of times. Left messages, begged to talk. I didn't answer. Because once a person erases your life from the inside out, you don't owe them another word. The first few days after I kicked Vanessa out felt like a strange kind of silence had settled over everything. Not peaceful silence, just the absence of noise. No footsteps echoing through the hallway. No familiar rustle of her getting ready in the morning. The home we had built together suddenly felt too big, like a house wearing someone else's memories. I moved through it like a guest in my own life, trying to figure out what was mine and what was only borrowed from a fantasy. The kids were with her, at least temporarily. We hadn't gone to court yet, but I didn't fight it at first. I needed space to think, to breathe, and, if I'm honest, to feel the full weight of what had happened without their tiny voices softening the edges. I loved them. Still did. Maybe always would. But they weren't mine. And that truth needed time to settle before I knew what to do with it. I focused on simple things at first, organizing drawers, cleaning out closets, throwing away anything that smelled like her or reminded me of a time that no longer existed. I deleted photos, canceled subscriptions she used. I even repainted the living room, not because it needed it, but because I needed to change something that had her fingerprints on it. It was therapeutic in a quiet, methodical way, like I was carving out space in the wreckage just for myself. I started working longer hours, not because I had to, but because the routine grounded me. My team noticed something had shifted, but no one asked. Maybe they'd heard rumors. Maybe they just saw it in my face. Either way, I appreciated the silence. I wasn't ready to talk. Then, one afternoon while grabbing coffee after work, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Emily. She was an old colleague from another department, someone I used to joke with during lunch breaks before she transferred to a different office. She looked the same, bright eyes, quick smile, but there was something steadier about her now, like she'd grown into herself in a way I hadn't noticed back then. We caught up. Small talk at first, then a little deeper. She asked how Vanessa was, and I paused for just a second too long. "We're not together anymore," I said, simply. She didn't press, just nodded, like she understood that there was more to the story, but I wasn't ready to tell it. A few days later, she messaged me. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a walk. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people figuring out what the world looked like now that it had changed. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet, but I didn't have to. She was patient, kind, and honest in a way that didn't try to fix me, only meet me where I was. We talked about work, about books, about music we'd forgotten we loved. And somewhere in those conversations, I started to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Presence. Not hope. Not quite love. Just presence. The beginning of something real. Maybe for the first time. It's been a little over a year now. Funny how a year can feel like both a lifetime and a blink. Some mornings, I wake up and it still catches me. The quiet. The peace. The absence of all the questions I used to live with every day. And not just the big ones, like who my wife was, or whether my kids were really mine. No, I mean the small, subtle questions that ate away at me slowly. Why she seemed distant. Why her laughter stopped reaching her eyes. Why I always felt like I was one conversation behind her. All of that is gone now. Vanessa hasn't tried contacting me in months. At first, it was constant calls, texts, voicemails. Some angry, some pleading, all full of words I no longer had space for. I ignored them all. I had nothing left to give her. Not even explanation. She chose her lies, and now she can live in the shadow of them. That's not mine to fix anymore. As for the kids, that part is harder to talk about. I think about them more than I let on. I don't know what the future holds there. Maybe one day they'll come find me. Maybe they'll grow up with their own questions. If they do, I hope they'll understand that I left not because I stopped loving them, but because I needed to survive. I couldn't keep pretending I was their father when I wasn't. Not after everything. But that doesn't mean I've stopped caring. Love doesn't always vanish with truth, it just changes its shape. Emily and I are still seeing each other. We've taken things slowly, deliberately. No rushing. No need to force something that already feels natural. She's the kind of person who listens with her whole self. Who lets silence speak when words fall short. Being with her feels like breathing clean air after years of fog. No performance. No guessing. We go on hikes. We cook. We fall asleep on the couch mid-movie. There's no high drama, no intense declarations. Just mutual respect, curiosity, comfort. She knows what I've been through, not because I told her everything, but because she never once asked me to be someone I'm not. And maybe that's the most healing thing of all. People ask if I regret anything. I think they expect me to say yes. And sure, if I could go back and undo the years I spent loving someone who was never honest with me, I might. But regret is heavy, and I've carried enough weight. What I feel now isn't regret. It's release. I let go of a life that wasn't mine, to find one that finally is. And if you've read this far, if you're where I was, full of doubt and confusion, let me tell you this. You are not crazy for sensing the change. You are not weak for wanting answers. And you are not broken for walking away from a lie, no matter how beautiful it once seemed. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your ruin. You owe yourself peace. And now, finally, I have mine.